it was called Dorsey's Tavern. And then came the Con Edison substation. Now we cross the street and we start coming up to Spring Street. On the corner was Letty's Coal Company. And next to that was Paul Kazura's Meat Market. And then Sackett's Drugstore, and then Dunn's Tavern, which later became Wolf's. And then a tinsmith shop owned by a man called Jakey Rehive. That's the place where the funeral home is right now. However, before the funeral home, there was also a diner there. And then comes the Farragut Inn. Now, as we round the corner to get on Warburton Avenue, north on Warburton Avenue, there was a great big parking lot there. And every Saturday night, this is during Prohibition, you would see some big cars come into the parking lot, Rolls-Royce, Cadillacs, and or whatever, all the big limousines. So I guess there must have been some good parties going on inside. And then there was the Protection Fire Company, and then Jimmy Devine's Garage. Now Jimmy Devine's Garage later on became Smallheiser's Garage. And after the war, Smallheiser went into the jewelry business. Then we have the Hastings movie, and we have Gus Bruning. Gus Bruning owned an ice cream parlor. He was also a very, very fine gentleman, and he was almost like a second father to me. He always looked out for me. And then we had Finnerty Plumbing Company. After Finnerty came Joe Devine's Garage. This was Jimmy Devine's uncle, I believe. Then came Vayday's Bakery, and then the post office. And then on the corner was Riley's Garage. Now Riley had a boat down at the river, and I guess it was a well-known fact that it was just about the fastest boat on the river. Nobody would ever challenge him to a race. Now we cross the street and we'll walk south on Warburton Avenue, and we come to St. Matt's Church. Father O'Keefe was a pastor at the time. And then as we cross over the bottom of Villard Avenue, there was a tailor shop right in the corner there. And then we come to Frisbee's Restaurant. Later, that became Johnny Bocar's Restaurant. And now you probably think that Brennan would be next, but that is not so. Brennan was on Main Street at the time. And now we come to the Honeymoon Flats. Now, the Honeymoon Flats were built by a man by the name of Whitman. As a matter of fact, Whitman Street was named after him. Now, he ran into a lot of tough luck. If you ever go in back of those apartments, those honeymoon apartments, you think that you're standing in the bottom of the Palisades, a sheer rock. So it cost him a fortune and just to dig the foundation, and then also the Depression came, and I understand he went bankrupt. And after the stores were completed, for the longest time, the stores were half empty. People just, not only the stores were empty, but the apartments above were empty. The people just could not afford the $30 a month, I believe, that they were getting for rent. And on the corner, the very first store, Charlie Macaluso he had a store there and he used it for a warehouse. And then came a Jewish delicatessen store, Weinberger's, I believe the name of it was. And then there was a dry cleaning store. And then O'Neill's had a gift shop. And two of our local boys, Pat Grady and Sweeney, they opened up a dancing school in one of the stores there. And a couple of doors down, there was a funeral parlor. Yes, believe it or not, there was a funeral parlor. And a little further down, there was a bank, I believe, it was a building and a loan. Then the last door, before you come to the VHW, there was Larry Martin's beauty parlor, and Jake Hoppin, which you have mentioned in some of your publications, he had his barber shop in the window of Larry Martin's salon. Now what do we got next? Oh yeah, then we, of course, it's the Veterans Hall building. And I spent many a happy time there as I got a little bit older, going to the dances that they used to hold there Saturday nights. They had many name bands. I remember once when George Olson played there, and his vocalist was Dolly Dawn. And it was always a nice place to go on a Saturday night and dance. Now, at the other end of VHW, there was a small wooden building in the back, and that's where Dr. Finkelstein had his dentist office. And that area later on, they built a diner there, and then later on that diner moved on Spring Street where Jakey Rehive was, and then they tore it down and the funeral parlor. Well, anyway, the first store you come to was a hardware store. It was Shoshack's hardware store. Now, in one of your publications, you talk about a fire that destroyed a lot of apartments and homes. It happened on an extremely cold night. I presume you are referring to the Shoshack hardware store fire, because I remember watching that fire, and I remember the very bitter, bitter cold night. Now, next to that was Bartco's delicatessen store. Then you had Ferrara's grocery store, and you had People's Meat Market. Gus DeMichael, I believe, worked there as a young man. And later on, much later on, Jacobson's moved right near there. Then there was an Andrew Davy store, Andrew Davy grocery store. And then there was Charlie Neely's store. And you wonder why I never mentioned Ben Calder. Well, he came quite a bit later. And his first store was where Jacobson was, his first store. Well, anyway, after Charlie Neely's, there was another beauty salon, Scholsky's Beauty Salon. And next to him was Reader's Department Store. And I guess we all know his son, Dr. Billy Reader, or Ryder, and he also had Billy has a brother called Sid. Two very nice fellows. Now as we go up Main Street, well, incidentally, getting back to Reader's, that was an old wooden structure at the time. It was not the modern brick building that's there now. It was a wooden structure that was later torn down and replaced with the present building. As we go up Main Street, on the north side, there was a shoe repair shop, and there was a liquor store, and that's where the Lutheran church used to be, where it is now Bolanger's parking lot. Now, the Lutheran church was put on skids and pushed up Main Street and located at its present location a little north of St. Stanislav's Polish Church. And a little further up, the great big building there was a 5 and 10 cent store. And then there was a record shop, and there was Brennan's Taxi, and then there was the bank. Now, in the bank, I remember Jack O'Leary worked there, and Francis Marr worked there, and Dick Hogg worked there. And a little further up, Leo Montalban used to live in one of those houses there, and he taught the people how to play a violin. He was a violin instructor. And a little further up from there on Main Street, there was a little small house right next to the road. That's where the groundkeeper used to live that worked for the Christie Estates. Now as we cross over to Main Street and start coming down, we see that Lutheran church there that I told you that was moved. And then we come to the Farragut House. Now, there's something at the Farragut House that should be looked into. There is a cemetery in the back of that house. A lot of the tombstones are knocked down, I believe, and they're very, very old. And I think if somebody checked on the dates and names, you could probably get a lot of early data of who lived in Hastings at the time. Then we came to St. Stanislav's Church, and Reverend Daskwich was the pastor at the time. And then next was a library, and also the police station or whatever, and Judge Beavers had his headquarters there. And later on, the Hook and Ladder moved in there. Then we had a little store there. They call it the music shop. I guess everybody that went to school stopped in that music shop in the morning to get some candy. And next to that was a tailor shop. And then there was some sort of a real estate office. And then there was Riola's Meat Market. And then there was Otto's Barber Shop. And later on, Pete and Paul DeChara took that over. And as they retired, it later became the Green Tavern. It was run by the Michael brothers. And down from there, Fusco had an ice cream parlor. And well, past that was Charlie and Grace Grandy. They had an Italian deli. And right next to them was Mittendorf's. Now here again, Mittendorf's were there first, and then later on they moved across the bridge on a corner of Washington and Warburton. And a few doors down, you had Ufer's Hardware Store. Now Betty Zebrock, I believe her mother was mentioned in some of your publications as a midwife. She worked there, and she was just one wonderful person. You should talk to her. She probably could tell you a lot more than I could. And then there was electrical repair shop and shoe shine parlor. And then on the corner of Main and Warburton was Heine's ice cream parlor. Then as you turn the corner, you come to Ansel's Delicatessen. Now, when we first came to Hastings, Mr. Ansel had a deli upstairs. Is a funeral parlor. But before the funeral parlor, there was a diner there. That's the same diner that was next to the VHW. and it moved to that spot, and then they tore that down, and the funeral parlor was built there. Now we come up to Farragut Inn, and that was owned by the Coppin brothers. And they did a very brisk business. This was during Prohibition. And on a Saturday night, the parking lot right next to the Farragut on Warburton Avenue, it was just loaded with big name cars, Cadillacs, Rolls Royces, Buicks, I mean, all, you name them. And after that, there was the Protection Fire Company, and then there was Jimmy Devine's garage. And Jimmy Devine sold his garage later to Mr. Smallheiser, and he ran the garage during the war years, and then after that he got out of the garage business and went into the jewelry business. And after that you have the Hastings movie, and then Gus Bruning's ice cream parlor. Gus, incidentally, was a wonderful German gentleman, and he was almost like this father to me. He knew that my father died when I was very young, and he just sort of looked after me. I always appreciated that. And then came Finnerty's Plumbing Company. He ran his plumbing business right from his home. And then there was Joe Devine's garage. I believe this was Jimmy's uncle. And Vayday's Bakery, and then the post office. And then after the post office, you had Riley's garage. Riley was noted for having the fastest boat, I guess, on the Hudson. Nobody would ever challenge him to a race. Now we cross the street, and we get on the other side of Warburton Avenue, and you have St. Matthew's Church there. Father O'Keefe was the pastor. And as you walk down, as you come to the bottom of Villard, now you walk up Villard and you cross Broadway, and the first house on the left, that's where the mayor of Hastings lived, Mayor Reynolds. And if you walk up a little bit more, there's a house there they call the Spite House. Now, the story was that these people who live up to Riverview Manor, they just didn't want anybody else living up there but people that had a lot of money, I suppose. And this house was built just so it could, well, today they would call it low-income housing, I believe. But that time they called it the Spite House. Well, let's get back down to Warburton Avenue now. And we cross over at the bottom of Villard. And there was a tailor shop on the corner. And then there was Frisbee's restaurant. Now, later, a fellow by the name of Johnny Boker, I believe, bought the restaurant from Frisbee's when Frisbee retired. And he ran that restaurant, I guess, for about 40 years, him and his wife. They were two really hard-working people. And then I suppose you want me to say there was Brennan's Taxi, but Brennan at that time was up on Main Street, so he wasn't there. He came there much later. And now we come to the Honeymoon Flats. And they were built by a man by the name of Whitman. Whitman Street was named after him. Well, he never realized that when he started to excavate for those apartments that it was nothing but rock. And if you walk in back of the Honeymoon Flats, you think that you're standing in the bottom of the Palisades. So I guess he spent so much money digging a foundation, and then the Depression came, that I understand he went bankrupt. And when they were completed, most of the time, this is during the Depression years now, people just could not afford $30 a month. And most of the stores and the apartments upstairs were empty. Incidentally, at that time, if you wanted to buy a store with like a two-room apartment in the back, and then three-room apartment, two three-room apartments upstairs, you could have bought the whole shebang for about $4,000. Boy, did we miss the boat. Then As you come to the Honeymoon Flats, the first store in the corner, Charlie Macaluso, he had a warehouse there for his grocery store. He was like a storage place. And then there was a Jewish deli. Some people by the name of Weinberger owned it. And then there was a dry cleaner. And then Jim O'Neill's wife, she had a gift shop there. And then Pat Grady and a fellow by the name of Sweeney, they had a dancing school there, a tap dancing school. I remember Elaine Ansel was one of their star pupils. Then comes the funeral parlor. Yes, there was a funeral parlor in the Honeymoon Flats at one time. And then there was a bank building. I believe it was like building a loan or something like that. And then Larry Martin's Beauty Salon was the last store by the VFW. And this fellow Jake Hoffman that you mentioned in your publication, he also had a barber shop in the same store that Larry Martin had his beauty salon. Jake Hoffman had his beauty, not his beauty, but his barber shop in the window. And he was very well liked. As a matter of fact, he was my barber, and he had a great business. And now you come to the VFW building. It was way in the background. It's still there. And I remember spending many, many enjoyable Saturday nights. This is when I get a little bit older. They used to have the dances there on a Saturday night. And they used to get big name bands. I remember George Olson played there one time, and his singer was Dolly Dawn. And like I say, they got a lot of other names. And of course, the other places where we went to dance was the Cigaretskis on Washington Avenue. There was always a dance there, like on a Saturday. And then that Irish club on Warburton Avenue. I just can't think of what they call it now. You probably know what I mean. And they had dances there. Or the Lyceum, yeah, that was it, the Lyceum. And between the three places, there was always a dance going on somewhere where we'd be able to go. And now after the VFW, there was a small wooden building there. And in the back, that's where Dr. Finkelstein had his dentist office upstairs. I went there a few times to get my teeth filled. I still remember that. Now we come to the great big brick building, and Show Shacks had their hardware and paint store on the bottom. Now, in one of your publications, you're talking about a great big fire that a lot of people were burned out, and it was extremely cold. I'm sure that that's the fire you were talking about, because I remember that one distinctly, because it was at night. We got out of bed and we went there, and the water was freezing as you're coming out of the hose. It was really awful. And right next to Show Shack's hardware store was a deli called Bartko's Deli. And then there was Ferrara's, and there was People Meat Market. Gus DeMichael used to work there as a young little fella. And then there was a Andrew Davies grocery store. And then Charlie Neely. Ben Calder came much later. He was where Jacobson had his first store, and then he moved across the street. But Charlie Neely was one of the originals. Very, very nice man. And next to Charlie Neely's was another beauty salon, Scholsky's Beauty Salon. And next to that was Reader's Department Store. Now, Reader's Department Store at that time was in a great big wooden structure. And it was torn down, and the building that's there now was put up in its place. And his two sons, Dr. Billy Reeder and Sidney, I know him quite well. We were boys together, and we used to play together. And now, as you walk up the north side of Main Street, there was a shoe repair store there was a liquor store, and then there was the Lutheran Church. That's where Bolanger's parking lot is right now. Eventually that church was put on skids and it was moved up the main street up to its present location. And then came there was a 5 and 10 cent store, and there was a record shop, and Brennan's Taxi, and there was the bank where Jack O'Leary and Francis Moore and Dick Hogg worked. And there was Leo Montalban had his violin instruction studio in his home there. And then a little further up, there was a house right next to Main Street, sort of down low, and that's where the groundkeeper for Christie's used to live. Now as we cross the street and start coming down Main Street, that would be where the Lutheran church is, just about, the one that was moved. And then you come to the Farragut house. Now, in the back of the Farragut house, there was a cemetery there. And I believe that if you already haven't done it, somebody should check on those stones there. It is a very old cemetery. A lot of the stones have fallen down, but the names and the dates are still visible. Then we come to St. Stanislaus Church. Father Daskowicz was the pastor. And then you have the library building that was in the back, and then you had the police station there. That building right now has the Hook and Ladder. And then came a music shop. This little store, the man sold all kinds of penny candy there, and every time we went to school, we'd all stop in there and buy a little bit of candy. He did a Russian business, but I don't see how he made any money. And then there was a tailor shop there, and then there was a real estate office, and then there was Riola's Meat Market, and then there was Otto's Barber Shop, which he sold later to the Paul and Pete DeChara, and then later on they sold the store to the Green Tavern. And the store became the Green Tavern. And a little further down was Fusco's Ice Cream Parlor. And then there was Charlie and Grace Grandy's Italian Deli. And then there was Mittendorf's. Now, Mittendorf had their hardware store there, and then they moved a little later on to the other side of the bridge, on the corner of Warburton and Washington. But originally they were near the bottom of Main Street. Then came Ufer's hardware store, and this young lady, Betty Zebrock, worked there, and she was just a wonderful person. Incidentally, she's still around. If you talk to her, she could tell you an awful lot about Hastings in those years. And then there was an electric repair shop, and then there was a shoe shine parlor, and then there was Heine's Ice Cream Parlor. Heine's was on the corner of Main and Warburton. Then as you make a left turn on Warburton Avenue, you came to Ansel's Deli. Now, Mr. Ansel had this deli, and he made just about the best clam chowder that anybody could ever want to make. On a Friday, the people were all coming out with their little pails with his clam chowder. And then when Roosevelt, the president, repealed the Homestead Act, Ansel he opened up a little beer tavern downstairs where he sold his 3.2 beer. And then later on, he closed that up and he opened up his tavern on the upper floor, level with the street. And when he passed on, his son Alfred took over, and he ran it until he sold it to the present owners right now.